Lesson 12, Section 1. In this presentation, we'll be looking at feminine nouns with stems and os, that is, second declension feminine nouns, diminutives and common gender, and miscellaneous topics, crasis and dactylic hexameter. The second declension consists not only of masculine nouns like logos and neuter ones like dohran, but also of a small number of feminine nouns. These nouns have stems in os and are declined exactly like their masculine counterparts. This is the declension of a word we are very familiar with, logos, and to get to our second declension feminine nouns, we're just going to take the endings here, drop the rest, and look at a word like Naesos, hey, island, and see something interesting. We get the os ending we're used to, but the gender is feminine, as the form of the definite article indicates. So we're going to get our stem in the usual way by dropping os from the nominative singular. That leaves us with neis as the stem throughout the declension. And that's effectively all that we have to do. These are then the forms of Naesos, hey, island. And these are the endings that we will see on any feminine noun of the second declension. In English and Greek, a diminutive is a word that expresses affection towards someone or something or emphasizes its smallness. Diminutives are usually derived from other words. Here are some examples in English. From the word sweet, we get sweetie. From the word dear, we get darling. And from the word book, we get booklet. Diminutives are formed in many different kinds of ways with many different suffixes in English. In Greek, diminutives are often formed with the suffix ion. Hapais, the child, becomes tapaidion, the little child. As you might have guessed from the ending, the on there, this little diminutive suffix is neuter. Accordingly, the gender of the diminutive itself will be neuter too. That's why the definite article has changed form. Now to a different topic. In Greek, a noun with a common gender is a noun whose gender will be either masculine or feminine, depending on the biological sex of its referent. For instance, hapais, this would be a male child, because the definite article tells us that we're dealing with a masculine object or thing. This would be a boy, whereas he pais would be a female child, that is, a girl. In the same way, ha hippos would be a male horse, that is, a stallion, and he hippos would be a female horse, that is, a mare. Such changes do not affect declension. So the definite article is going to change form, but the endings are going to stay the same. Here are some other common nouns with common gender. We've got anthropos, so we do see he anthropos as well as ha anthropos, although usually he anthropos has an additional connotation. It's not usually a positive one. But we see, in a more neutral way, he theos in addition to ha theos. And the definite article there is going to tell us that we're dealing with either a male god, ha theos, or a female god, a goddess, he theos. Like elision, crasis was used by the Greeks as we use contraction, that is, to shorten common words and phrases. Unlike elision, crasis involves the mixing of a word that ends with a vowel or diphthong with a word that begins with one. For instance, hoi kaloi kai agatoi. It's actually kind of hard to pronounce if you don't do this sort of contraction we see with crasis. This means good and fine men. It's a pretty common phrase, especially in philosophical writers. I'm talking about ethics, for instance. And what we see here is that we have two words, kai and agatoi, one that ends with a vowel or a diphthong, here the diphthong I, and another that begins with a vowel or a diphthong, in this case, the vowel alpha. So those are actually going to mix through crasis to ka gatoi. Hoi kaloi ka gatoi. It's actually much easier to pronounce. If the result begins with a consonant, as it does in this case, crasis is easily recognizable from the breathing mark. We would never see a breathing mark over what is really the second letter of this word here if crasis were not going on. Now, sometimes the first of the words that have been mixed together doesn't start with a consonant, so it's a little harder to tell, but often crasis involves, well, short common words like kai, for instance. We also see ha and ah, the vocative particle. The first word in crasis tends to be a short common word like kai, ha, or ah. The epics of Homer and Hesiod are written in dactylic hexameter, that is, lines of 6 dactyls. A dactyl is a metrical foot consisting of a long vowel followed by 2 short ones. Long, short, short, as we see from the notation there. Such a foot is called a dactyl because it resembles a finger, in Greek daktylos, having 1 long segment and 2 short ones. Now you can see this and how it corresponds to a dactyl in meter by holding up your left hand in front of your face and looking at your forefinger and seeing that the first segment of your forefinger is about twice as long as the second and third segments. Now, that's to the Greeks why it's appropriate to call a dactyl, a daktylos, a finger. Here is the first line of the Odyssey. As we know, the Odyssey and the Iliad, both written by Homer, are both written in dactylic hexameter. We're going to see what that sounds like.
Andramoyen nepemusa politropon hosmalapolla.
So how would we scan that? Like this. Andramoyen nepemusa politropon hosmalapolla. Here we have a pretty regular alternation of 1 long and 2 short syllables. There's a little bit of variation there at the end. We'll look at why in just a second. But this is the basic meter, dactyl, 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 of the Odyssey and the Iliad. A long syllable, there are some nuances here. We'll look at some of the exceptions to the rule. A long syllable may be substituted for the 2 short syllables in a dactyl. So rather than getting a long followed by 2 shorts, you may just see long, long. At that point, we're no longer dealing with a dactyl, but what is called a spondy, two long syllables. Anyway, this phenomenon is known as substitution. We also see a syllable that ends in a long vowel or diphthong may count as short if the next word begins with a vowel. This is called correption, and we need to look at an illustration of this. So we actually see this in the first line of the Odyssey. Andramoyen nepemusa. You probably wondered why, if you listened carefully, I did not pronounce moi, or that the person did not pronounce moi as long. Andramoyen nepe. Despite the fact that oi, the diphthong oi, and all diphthongs are always supposed to be long by nature. The reason we do not pronounce this as long or count it as long for purposes of scansion is because the next word begins with a vowel. And to fit the meter here, we're going to pronounce moi, count moi as short. So again, that epsilon there is short, so that moi, that normally long diphthong, is going to count as a short and be pronounced as a short. Andramoyen nepemusa. Dactylic hexameter is an example of a catalectic meter, which means that its last foot is shortened by 1 syllable, which results in either a trochee, a long short, or a spondy, long long. That's why we saw that variation at the end there. Dactylic hexameter then may be visualized as follows. So we have 6 feet, as we call these little sections, and each foot is going to be either a dactyl, long, short, short, or a spondy, long, long, by means of substitution. except for the last foot, which can be either long, long, which would be a spondy, or long, short, a trochee. And that X, that anceps sign there at the end, indicates that that last syllable can be long or short. For the forms of second declension feminine nouns, again, they're basically the same as second declension masculine nouns, take a look at page 26. And for further reading on crasis, take a look at page 4. Thank you.